Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the tutorial video for MaterialMerger, the new editor utility which I've created for the Unity editor, which will allow you to streamline your project and downsize the amount of materials that you have in your project. If you have a moderate to large size project, you may notice, unless you have a team working on your 3D models, that you will have a very large number of materials building up within your project files. The reason for this is because every 3D model that you import from a utility such as Blender or 3ds Max or whatever you're using for your 3D modeling, Unity will create a unique set of materials for that model. What this means is if you have a number of 3D models in your project, you may have any number of duplicate materials within the project. You could have 5 or 6 or many more blacks or shades of black or shades of red, green, blue, whatever. So what MaterialMerger does is it scans through your project files, it finds materials that are exactly the same, or it can also find materials that are very similar depending on your settings if you choose to use fuzzy matching, and it will automatically reassign any objects in your scenes or any prefabs in your project using those materials to one specific version of that material, and then it will delete the rest. So what will happen is, in effect, at the end, you could go from 1,400 materials, as I've got in a current project I'm working on, and knock that down to about 650 once you've removed all of the duplicate materials. Obviously this is quite useful for streamlining your project and reducing bloat on your project, and it's certainly something which has driven me to produce this tool in the first place. Okay, so to use the tool, to demonstrate the tool here, I've just got the standard Unity Robot Lab scene open in front of you. I haven't changed any of the materials in this scene, I haven't done anything with it other than to import the MaterialMerger script and the resources folder that comes with MaterialMerger, just for the MaterialMerger logo which is used on the window. Now to access MaterialMerger, go to the Tools menu that will appear once you've installed this asset. Click on MaterialMerger, and the MaterialMerger window will open. The first thing it warns you to do is to make sure that you've tested MaterialMerger on a copy of your project. I can't emphasize this enough. MaterialMerger has the capability to delete materials from your project. That means there's no undo. Once they've been deleted, you can't get them back, and if it's deleted materials that you actually needed to use in the project, they will be gone forever and you'll have to recreate them. So please, please, please create a copy of your project and use MaterialMerger on it first to make sure that you've got your project set up correctly. I'll explain more about setting up your project in a second, but first of all I'll go through the options that are in this menu here. The first option is a button to analyse your project. This button is harmless, you can click on this and it will do nothing to your project. It will just scan through and give you some information on your project. So click on this here for the Robots Lab scene, and the output is generated in this window here at the bottom. It tells you that file logging is active. We'll talk more about that in a second. Now in this scene it's found 90 user materials in one scene, and it has found 3 prefabs. It's also found a material here which MaterialMerger at the moment does not work with, and that's the reflective bump to specular shader. So any materials using the shader are ignored at the moment by MaterialMerger. I am working on adding support for more shaders as time goes by, but at the moment I've just covered the basic set of shaders, the most common ones used. The next line down states that it has found 3 duplicate materials that can be merged. So there are 3 materials in this project that are the same as another material or materials and can thus be removed. And it states that delete duplicates, which is the options up here, is enabled, then those 3 materials will be deleted from the project. It then goes on to list material substitutions and says that the material named floor tile gutter will be substituted for the material named prop battering ram 1, as would teeth material, as would eyes material. So these 3 materials are all the same as prop battering ram. Now as this is set at the moment to a strict search, then these 3 materials are all exactly the same as prop battering ram. Now we can confirm that by actually looking at these materials in the project. So if we do a quick search for prop battering ram, here it is, and it's just a typical grey shade or even white shaded material. So all the values are 255 here for red, green, blue and alpha. Now if we have a look for eyes material, the MaterialMerger says is the same. You can see that this material is also 255 for all of the values, so it is identical. And it's a bit pointless really having two materials the same. And again, teeth material is also exactly the same. So you can see that MaterialMerger has found three materials here that basically aren't needed. They could all be replaced by this one material, prop mattering rem 1. It then goes on to list all of the materials found in the project, and this is all 90 user materials that are in the project and their names. Obviously if you have a large project with a lot of materials, this list will be very, very long. And this is going to lead on to my next point in a second, to do with logging. And at the end it just tells you that the output has been logged. Okay, so this is the analyze project. It will look through the project, it will look at what materials you've got, it will tell you how many materials there are, how many scenes that the materials are spread over. So it will tell you how many materials there are in the project, how many scenes there are, and how many prefabs there are in your project. Now these prefabs obviously needn't necessarily be actually instanced in any of these scenes. Okay, these are just prefabs that are sitting in your assets folders and have materials assigned to them. It goes on to tell you about any materials that have shaders that aren't supported, and basically gives you a pretty detailed update as to the contents of your project and how they will be affected by MaterialMerger being run on it. Now, as I stated earlier, there's a lot of information can appear in this window, and if you have a lot of materials, this window can get full. If it gets full, and that's over about 16,300 characters, then you will start to lose text off the top of the window. Okay, so you'll have what's at the end, but you will be missing what's at the start. Now, what I have is an option up here called log to file. This is always ticked by default. What this does is it also duplicates what's the output to this window to a text file, which goes into your root assets folder. Okay, it won't show up in the project menu, but it is just a basic text file. The next option below, which only shows when log to file is ticked, is showing complete. So if you check this box, then once the analysis is complete, or the merge operation is complete, and the text file is completed, then Windows Explorer or the Mac equivalent of that will then open and show you that file. So you can just double click on it and open the file quickly just to have a read through of the full log. Okay. The next option down is protected folders. And now this links back strongly to one of the points I touched upon at the start of the video. This requires you to set your project up before you use MaterialMerger. Now, this is a very important point. If your project has materials that are assigned at runtime by scripts, say for example you may have a traffic light with a material for red, a material for amber and a material for green, but only one of those materials is assigned to the 3D object at any one time. So say for example it's red, and then as the program runs, something happens and your script changes that material from red to amber to green. MaterialMerger picks up which materials are assigned to objects in the game, and it also picks up which materials aren't assigned or aren't used at all in the project. It will delete those materials if you select delete duplicates. So it is important that if you have any materials that are assigned at runtime, or you need them later but they are not assigned to an object in the editor, you need to make sure that those materials go into a protected folder so that MaterialMerger will ignore those materials. Now, a protected folder is very easy to set up. You can just create another folder in your assets and pop your materials that you want to keep in that folder. Or if you already have them in a folder, then you can just select that folder, and I'm just going to randomly select script in this case, and click add folder to protected list. And there we go, it appears in there. So we've got some more in the audio folder as well, so we can just add that. So you can add any number of folders to the protected list, and MaterialMerger will ignore the contents of those folders. Now obviously you don't want to be protecting folders that contain materials that you do want it to analyze. So hence, before you run MaterialMerger, set up a folder and just have materials in the folder that you know you need to keep. Okay? Once you've done that, they're protected. MaterialMerger won't touch those. The next option down is delete duplicates. This speaks for itself, really. If you run MaterialMerger without this option checked, MaterialMerger will go through your project, it will reassign duplicate materials so that your project will only use a streamlined number of materials, but it won't delete the duplicated materials. So it's kind of a safe option to make sure you don't delete anything you actually do want to keep but you're not yet using. But if you want to streamline your project, you need to check this box. This option will cause MaterialMerger to delete materials that have been merged. Now, if you look down the list here, the output from the project analysis, you can see that the ice material is one of the materials that have been marked for merging. Okay, so it's no longer needed, and therefore, if delete duplicates is enabled, it will be deleted. It may be the case that some materials aren't for merging at all because they're not being used by anything, and therefore they will just be marked for deletion. So it's well worth analysing the project and having a look through the results before you run MaterialMerger, because I can't emphasise enough, there's nothing more painful than forgetting to protect some materials that you need to use later or that are assigned at runtime, and then finding they've been deleted. Okay, and you get bright purple, bright pinky mauve type objects appearing in the editor screen because they've got no textures assigned or no materials assigned. So make sure you do analyse your project, you read the results and make sure you're happy with them before you actually run this with delete duplicates. The next option down is confirm deletion. As it runs through and starts to delete the duplicate materials, it will ask you, are you sure you want to delete this material? And it will do that for every material. That's fine as a safety backup, but just bear in mind that if you do have, for example, 600 materials that are due for deletion, you could be sitting there for a while deleting, or clicking on the OK button to delete those materials. So again, preparation is key. So make sure you do have the materials you definitely want to keep in a protected folder, and then you can just uncheck this box and just let MaterialMerger do its work. The last thing I need to show is how to use fuzzy matching. Now, on this updated version of the Robot Lab, I haven't made any personal changes to it myself, I've just imported the lab. But for some reason, MaterialMerger is now picking up 83 user materials, and it's only been able to match one of those. So there's obviously a few materials missing from the last import. But nevertheless, it's still picking up one material which it can match. And that's enough to demonstrate fuzzy matching. Now, what I've done at the moment is I've just done a project analysis on direct matching, and it's come up with the one duplicate material. Now, you may have a number of materials which are very similar shades and tones and otherwise aren't really discernible to the naked eye in terms of differences. And they may not, though, be exact matches in terms of their properties. So with fuzzy matching, what we can do is tell MaterialMerger to look for materials which are very similar to each other within a certain tolerance which you can specify, and it will match those materials and remove them. Now, we can specify red, green, blue, alpha and specular, which obviously is dependent upon the shaders used by the materials. But if you specified a particular value for example, specular, then obviously that won't have an impact on any shaders that are diffuse, for example. The values here go from 0, which is a direct match, to 0.5. Now what this does is this correlates with the property in the material. So here we're looking at the red tolerance, which goes from 0 to 255. A value of 0.5 here equates to half of the full value of the property, so 128 in this case. So this value of 0.5 will match two materials that are within 128 of each other in terms of their red value. So if you have one material which is say 213, another material is 81, and this property is set to 0.5, then these are within 128 of each other, so consider those two materials a match if the other properties are also matches as well. Obviously, the further to the right these properties go, the more range there is in the matching, and at 0.5 you're going to get materials matching which are yellows and oranges and so on, so it will look quite clearly very good. As a rough guide, I use 0.06 as an appropriate value for these to match materials which are similar to each other but not so dissimilar that you can tell the difference with the naked eye. So that's a good value for a rule of thumb. Once you've set these variables, MaterialMerger will then look for materials that are within these margins and match them together. Now, a good tool to use is just to analyse the project again, and it will tell you the effect that your settings have had on the fuzzy match search. Now in this case we've still only got one material which has been matched. So if we make this a little bit less sensitive, say we pop all these values up to 0.5, and we'll try again, you can now see that MaterialMerger has picked up 5 materials that match with this level of tolerance. Now, these materials are clearly going to be quite different, I would imagine. So it's matching, for example, tongue material and default material. Tongue material here is a kind of a dark brick red colour, and default material is a grey colour. So you can see clearly there's a big difference. So be very careful with how far to the right you set these sliders. It can make a big difference. And you can find that MaterialMerger will match materials which really you wouldn't want to be matched under normal circumstances. However, a moderate value, say in this case 0.06, is a good one to use as a rule of thumb. Okay, so with fuzzy matching value set to a moderate value, we've got, according to the project analysis, one material which is duplicated and therefore can be removed, and that will be the eyes material, which will be replaced with teeth material. So with that in mind, I'll set the MaterialMerger to delete duplicates. That will automatically remove the replaced material. I'm not interested in confirming deletion for this one material. I know which one it's going to be replacing, and I haven't got a problem with that. And I will click Merge Materials. And with that, we have a final output log, which just lists all the materials in the project, and then goes through to explain that it's found all these materials and finally made a few changes and deleted the eyes material as it said it would. And that was completed in less than half a second. So there you go. That's the use of MaterialMerger. I'll just reiterate what I said at the start. I can't emphasize this enough. Make sure that if you have any materials in your project which aren't assigned to an object in the scene, but they are going to be assigned at runtime by a script, make sure that those materials are put into their own folder, and that folder is added to the protected folder list. Otherwise it will be removed by MaterialMerger because they're not assigned to anything. And also obviously be careful with the delete duplicates. Make sure that you're happy with the materials that will be removed before you delete them. And other than that, have fun with the project. If there's any materials which, or shaders even, that aren't covered, supported by MaterialMerger, let me know via the contact me option on the website, and I will work to include those in an update later on. Thank you very much, and goodbye.